Hello everyone, Mark here, the man behind the curtain, and as part of a recent investigation into whether the Galactic Empire could invade and take over the Earth, the Templin Institute produced a number of custom images, and I thought it might be kinda cool to take a look at how one of those images was made from start to finish. So over the next 30 minutes or so, you're gonna see about 7.5, 8 hours of work. But before we jump in, two things I should mention. So the technique I use is called photo bashing. Basically, you just take, photos of objects and composite them into the scene until you get the results you want. I am by no means an expert at this technique. I just enjoy it, and as someone who can't draw worth a damn, photo bashing suits me pretty well. So you'll probably see me screw up some stuff during the course of this and have to redo it a bunch of times. That's just my process, because like I said, I am a novice at this. And the second thing I should mention is that when you're dealing with scenes of death and destruction and you're using the photo bash technique, unfortunately the only way to get reference photos of things like buildings on fire and structural damage and all these things is to look up photos of those and then incorporate them. So nothing too graphic in this, it just seems weird to kind of use these photos without acknowledging that. So if you're sensitive to that kind of imagery, feel free to sit this one out. So lastly, I'm not going to be talking over the full 30 minutes here. I'm just going to be chiming in every now and then to describe what's going on in the process. I'll put the time codes for those little commentary interludes in the description if you'd rather just skip to them. Alrighty, so let's jump in. So as you can see, things are moving pretty fast, but the first step was taking a stock photo of New York City. There's a bunch of websites that provide images like these that are very helpful for photo bashing. So the first step is to make sure that the perspective of the photo is aligned properly and that the skyline isn't curved or anything. Sometimes, depending on the lens used to take the photo, if it's a wide-angle lens, the skyline can be kind of warped. So the first step is to try to fix that. I go through a couple of methods here, I think. Eventually I just push the button that does it for you, but I initially tried a manual result, which, didn't work that well. When you're compositing multiple different landscapes into the same kind of scene, this is kind of necessary to make sure everything lines up properly, but since I'm only using the one photo, it probably wasn't as big a deal, but I always just like doing it. The next step was, because I was pretty certain I was going to be replacing the sky and adding in Star Destroyers and such hovering over the horizon, I had to go through the photo, super zoomed in, and basically just trace out every detail in that skyline so I could set it as a separate mask. It's a tedious process, and for a photo like this I would have to do it several different times so I could have, buildings in front of Star Destroyers, but then those Star Destroyers in front of other buildings. You just want all the layers to kind of be aligned properly, so having to cut out different samples of the image to form that is necessary, but like I said, pretty tedious. After I had masked out the skyline there, the next step, equally tedious, was to remove all the pedestrians and traffic from the streets. I figured if the Galactic Empire was invading, there wouldn't be just some guy calmly walking across the street there, so I just went in with the clone tool and, painted everyone out as best I can. If this was a bit more of a zoomed-in image focusing on that street, I probably would have put a bit more care into that. Some of the work is sloppy, but zoomed out and with all the smoke and fires and debris and Star Destroyers and such added, no one's going to notice that stuff unless you watch this video and then go to the finished image and look for all my mistakes. So this was actually kind of a fun part of the image just because I'm not too experienced using the clone tool and figuring out the best way to hide certain pedestrians and certain cars and such was challenging, and I think I learned a lot about how the tool is best used. So I don't know, it's also just kind of satisfying to watch, especially sped up like this. I wish it was that fast in real life. So it's generally a good idea to plan out what the final scene is going to look like, just so I don't waste a bunch of time masking out buildings that won't end up being necessary to the final scene. So I just used some, downloaded photos of Star Destroyers and AT-ATs, and just placed them into the scene doing really rough masks to see how they fit, if it looked good. It's tempting to put in as many Star Destroyers and AT-ATs and whatever else as you can possibly fit, but you don't want to crowd the composition too much. So, sometimes less is more. So this building on the left-hand side takes up a bunch of space, so I figured I should probably do something with it, as it's so prominent in the frame. So the idea of setting it on fire was, it's always a winner. This is another really time-consuming process. Basically, you need to go through as many photos of fire and burning buildings as you can find, and align those effects as best you can to the image that you're using. When I was just learning to do this, I didn't like putting that much work into these sorts of scenes, but as I get a little better at it, it really makes a ton of difference when you can find specific elements that really work to a specific part of the image you're trying to modify. So you'll see me try to find, burning windows and then place them over top a window, really go in depth with it. If it was, further in the background, I wouldn't put in all that effort, but because this is so prominent in the scene, it's a good idea. Alright, so this is where the fun begins, adding in all these Star Wars elements. I am absolutely miserable when it comes to 3D modeling and rendering out that stuff, so I was fortunate enough to enlist the services of Angelos, who is exceptionally talented at all that stuff. So he provided me with some Star Destroyers and tanks and all these things rendered out, and he put in a huge amount of effort replicating the lighting of the scene and kind of the atmosphere to make sure that when you drop these elements in, they don't look out of place. That said, they still do require a bit of finesse in Photoshop, but for the most part, just dropping these in, they look pretty good. If you'd like to see more of Angelos' work, I'm going to include a link to his portfolio in the description here. Do check it out, he does terrific stuff. When I'm using crappier models, I always like to hide them behind layers of dust or clouds or other effects, so you can't actually tell that they're not that detailed. But in the case of these Star Destroyers, they were so phenomenal that hiding them behind the clouds hurt me a bit, because you lost some of that great detail. But doing so incorporates them into the scene a bit more, and just makes them look more natural. Again here, I'm just adding more burning building effects, putting a little less effort this time around because it's further away in the scene. But I really tried to get the sense that this building was hit on the side by a turbo laser or something, and now it's on fire, so you can see some damage behind some of the flames there. Hopefully it looks okay. even though hiding stuff behind layers and layers of smoke and dust is kind of a cheat, in this case I think it worked really well, as the city is supposed to be on fire, so you would see, a lot of smoke and dust. So trying to, again, incorporate those into layers where it's not just one flat kind of smoke screen, but there's, one further back, one further back, one further back, so you get that sense of depth, I think really adds a whole lot. The final steps are then just adding the rest of the effects, the turbo lasers from the AT-AT, some explosions around the tanks, just kind of all bringing it together. Again, these lasers are provided by Angelos, who did a way better job than I can. It's deceptively difficult getting the lasers to be pointed in the right direction when you're trying to show 3D space on a 2D plane. You can rotate those lasers for hours and it never really looks right, so he did an excellent job where I would have probably just given up. And there you have it, the finished image. I did a couple things that weren't included in the time-lapse. The last step was bringing it into After Effects and adding a grain effect over the entire image. This helps just interweave everything together. It makes it look all part of the same photo as opposed to elements that have been composited in afterwards. And then as well, I added a bit of a color correction effect and some upping the contrast and saturation and all those things. So, like I said, I am no expert at photo bashing, but this was my process, and hopefully you've enjoyed this wallpaper. It is available on patreon.com/Templin Institute if you want to download it. $2, I think, gets you access. And lastly, thanks again to Angelos. He did an amazing amount of work on this. It's tough rendering out 3D stuff, so this wouldn't have been possible without him. Check out his link below. And until next time, this has been, what, a behind-the-scenes look? I don't have a name for it yet. All right, cheers, everybody. The Templin Institute investigates the nations, factions, and organizations of alternate worlds. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to join the Templin Institute, consider pledging to our Patreon page. Along with increased security access, you'll be able to vote in polls to determine future topics, get custom wallpaper every week, and receive some other exclusive rewards.